Come fly with us every day on America's legendary community station, WVOX, for you and yours at 1460 on your AM dial or streaming live right now at WVOX.com. Better yet, download the WVOX app and take us with you wherever you go.
1460 WVOX.
Stay tuned now for Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and our Dina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome, everybody, to Westchester Eye on the Radio. I'm Peter Moses with my co-host John Sharan and our Dina Seward. How are you guys doing today?
Doing very well, very well. Spring is in the air.
Aside from being blown around like we're Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, I'm doing pretty good. And I'll give you two words that should make you very happy, Peter. Peter Alonso.
If you could only feel. We're talking about the new Mets first baseman who
has gotten hits in his first two at-bats. His first at-bat each game of the first two games.
Yes, that's a little different than first two at-bats. Anyway, beyond baseball and the fact that the Mets are having a lousy early spring training with their run production, we have a show to do today that's not about preseason baseball.
But it's important.
It is. But you're waylaying me now. Today we have with us two guests. A woman named Judy Kass, who is both a therapist and a singer-songwriter. And with her, I don't know if who's with who, or they're just both together, is Gina Lamparella, who is a Broadway singer-dancer. And they both are part of something called 1 Billion Rising, which is a women's group for the most part. And you're having a march in March
2nd, to be exact.
So it's right upon us.
Yes.
And what is the purpose of the march? And we're differentiating. Before we do anything else, we are differentiating this from the other group.
Well, 1 Billion Rising was started by Eve Ensler, who also wrote the Vagina Monologues, and a group of us in Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow got together and did the Vagina Monologues at the Tarrytown Music Hall on February 13th. And now we're doing this, 1 Billion Rising, which was started in 2013, I believe.
Where?
And it was a worldwide event.
I figured that.
Yeah. Eve was encouraging people to do flash mobs all over the world. It was on 6 continents, and
you mean the few women scientists in Antarctica did not join in on this?
As far as I know,
they
did not.
They might have. It was
that would be
global.
all 7 then.
It was pretty global.
It would be, but I don't know that they did.
We don't have any media coverage to prove one way or the other.
So we can say whatever.
And what is the purpose of this?
So actually, 1 Billion Rising is really under the umbrella of V-Day, which also encompasses the play that Gina just recently directed in Tarrytown, Sleepy Hollow.
The
play.
The play. Okay.
You've also directed in Italy. Is that correct?
Yes. The first time I directed the Vagina Monologues, it was in Italy. A friend of mine named Barry Hockwald runs a sort of global theater company called the Global Theater Initiative, and she does a lot of work in Florence, Italy.
Firenze.
Yeah, Firenze. And she asked me to come and direct the show, which I did. It was a bilingual production because they have the show, they have it translated into many different languages. And so some of the actors were Italian and speaking Italian, and some were speaking in English, and we had subtitles.
No Yiddish, though.
There was no Yiddish. We stuck with the 2 languages for that particular one.
Or Ladino, the other Jewish language.
That's right.
But why should women march? Why should women get involved in this march?
Well, 1 billion comes from the fact that approximately 1 in 3 women are going to experience violence in their lifetime. And that translates, when you take the population, the demographics, to 1 billion women, which is where we get 1 billion rising, because we've got to stop it. It's not okay. And I think the first time we did, actually, was 2012. It was quite an event, and that was happening consistent with other global efforts. So basically, there are way too many. Consider 1 in 3 women experiencing violence in their lifetime.
And I think in some parts of the world, it's much more than that.
That's
percentage-wise.
That's right.
I think in parts of Africa and parts of South America.
In Central America.
I think the number is much greater.
That's right.
And
I would think the Middle East, too.
And
Yeah.
the Middle
Yep.
East, Middle East as bad as any other place
Yep.
for that.
That's right.
It's a real shame, and it's ongoing. I mean, it's
ongoing.
All of the marches that have taken place to date, all of the movement that we've had of empowering women, has not seriously diminished the fact that 1 in 3 women are being brutalized.
Yeah.
And is it all from men, or some of them are brutality women on women? I'm guessing it's mostly men.
It's mostly men. It's mostly men. Well, in Westchester County alone, I think the district attorney's office handled 2,169 domestic violence investigations.
We're going to have to stop at that number because we're going to a break.
Great.
We have several breaks. This is the long one. We're here with Judy Kass and Gina Lamparella. We're talking about violence against women and about what some women are doing to fight back against that, including a 1 billion rising event that's taking place March 2nd. When we come back, we're going to learn more about this. This is Westchester Eye on the radio on WVOX and WVOX.com. Stay on the station. Wait for us to come back. We'll be back.
Welcome back to our weekly discussion of issues relating to Westchester and the surrounding area. I'm John Charan, along with Peter Moses and Ardina Seward. And today we have 2 special in-studio guests, Judy Kass and Gina Lamparella, who are here to discuss 1 Billion Rising, a march that is going to take place on March 2nd. And ladies, let's get some housekeeping issues out of the way first. There's a website for your organization. Where can people go to find out more about it?
Well, we have a Facebook group, V-Day Tarrytown Sleepy Hollow.
Yes. There is a larger, Eve Ensler has a larger website, 1 Billion Rising. I think it's under V-Day. Again, I think that's the umbrella. And that will give you information about the global effort. But we have our Facebook page, V-Day Tarrytown Sleepy Hollow.
Now, tell us a little bit more about the March 2nd event. Where does it happen? And since it's a march, it goes from point A to point B. Where does it go?
Well, it's kind of a small march, but the main event is a flash mob dance, which Gina has choreographed. Is going to take place on March 2nd at Patriots Park in Tarrytown. It's right on Broadway. It's across from the high school. And we are going to meet there and march a bit because we do like passing cars to honk and say hi, and we want to be visible with some signs. And the nice thing about this is that it allows families with children who were not perhaps able to participate in the Vagina Monologues production to participate in an event that is fighting violence against women.
Besides actually marching, what is going to go on during this event during the day?
So we'll meet at 3 o'clock in the park, and we'll march for about 15, 20 minutes in and around the park. It's a nice big park with signs, and we will also gather to dance a dance that was choreographed by Gina, but to the music that has been used globally for all the risings. It's called Break the Chain. And if you go on the 1 Billion Rising website, you can actually hear it. And if you go on our Facebook page, you can see a videotaped instruction of the dance that Gina's put together. We thought of everything. Almost everything.
Please,
So did you channel Gower Champion or Bob Fosse
Or March Champion?
or March Champion or there's a guy from Portchester, Wayne Salento.
Sure,
Yeah.
Wayne
sure,
Salento. He's
sure.
from
He did
America
chorus
originally.
line. Yeah. He
Well,
does from
from
Portchester.
America.
Yeah.
To be honest, when 1 Billion Rising started, the organization wrote the song and recorded it, and Debbie Allen choreographed
She's from Mount Vernon, by the way.
Is she really? Yeah, she choreographed a dance to it, and they put it up on the website and said, you may use this, or you may use your own music, your own choreography, whatever you want to do. And I think what I did was take her stuff and change some things and simplify some things just to make it accessible so that anyone could really do it.
For those who don't know, Debbie Allen choreographed the movie and the TV show Fame.
Fame.
And her sister is Felicia Rashad.
That's right. That's right. She's also an actress and dancer. Mm-hmm.
Gina, I wanted to ask you about how art can be used as a communicative tool.
Who's art?
For politics.
Art who?
How does that? Obviously, Peter is not a communicative tool for politics, so we'll talk about how art is a communicative tool for politics. As how do you use art to influence politics? I should say.
Well, I think at its most basic, art makes you think and
feel.
And so hopefully it makes you think about what you're seeing or what you're hearing. It can spark a conversation about whatever that piece is or whatever it's bringing out in you. And if it touches you emotionally, it hopefully moves us all to act on things. I think Eve specifically chose dance for this particular protest because it was a physical form of art. It's sort of a joyous way to rebel, let's say. And because she was specifically talking about women who have been victims of violence, physical violence and sexual violence, a lot of times women sort of will sort of separate themselves from their bodies in reaction to that kind of violence. And this is a way to sort of come back to your own body, reclaim it in a joyous way with a bunch of other people around you, a nice community way of coming together and sort of rising up in joy.
It was mentioned earlier in the program that 1 in 3 women will likely experience some form of violence during their lives. The March 2nd event, are you doing anything to raise funds or to do anything to try to make sure that you can help these women?
Well, the vagina monologues, which is what we started with and presented that on February 13th, we had 2 beneficiaries in Westchester for those funds, and we did raise funds. Those 2 were domestic violence service organizations, Hope Store and My Sister's Place. And we raised about $42,000 with that
that's
event.
great.
That's fantastic.
And by the way, the fundraising is continuing, I believe, through March 8th, Gina, which is International Women's Day. So we're going to be taking in funds to go to these organizations through then.
And if people want to donate online, how do they do that?
They can donate through Hope Store, www.hopestorenewyork.org. I'll say that again, www.hopestorenewyork.org.
Is there an apostrophe in Hopes, or is that just run together?
Nope, no apostrophe on the email address.
HopeStoreNY.org.
Yeah, capital. I think it's a big NY.
Yep.
Yeah.
What about the women in the LGBTQ community who are marginalized by society, politicians, religion? And the reason why I ask is because we're going to have a guest on the line in a few minutes, Efrain Gonzalez, who is a Bronx political analyst, and we're going to talk about a particular.
Isn't he also an actual politician and not just an analyst?
That's his father. His father's a politician. Well, I mean, Efrain is political.
In politics.
He's in politics, but the point I want to make is that Efrain is going to talk about a particular city council person in the Bronx, Ruben Diaz Sr., who's made some horrible anti-gay remarks, and
among other things.
Among other things, and he's also with the Assemblies of God. So we're going to talk about that on the other side of the break. And John, you want to take us out?
Indeed we will. You are listening to Westchester Eye on the radio here on WVOX 1460 AM and heard worldwide at WVOX.com. I'm John Charan, along with Peter Moses and Ardina Seward, and our special in-studio guests are Gina Lamparella and Judy Kass. We're here talking about the 1 Billion Rising march that is going to occur on March 2nd in Tarrytown, and we're talking about how 1 in 3 women in the world will experience some form of violence in their lives, and how this is going to try to empower them and to try to give some funding and to help to make their lives a little bit better. So we hope you'll stay with us, and we'll be back right after a brief Fox News break.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
We are back. You're listening to Westchester Eye on the Radio.
So are we.
So are we. I am Ardina Seward along with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and our in-studio guests today are Gina Lamparella and Judy Kass, and they are, I want to call you guys organizers? Or you're organizers of the Billion Rising March, which is going to come up on March 2nd. And you can get more information about it on their Facebook page and also on their website. But one of the important things about the Billion Rising March is that it brings, it highlights issues that women have all over the world. And one of those issues is how the female gay community and transgender community is treated. We have on the line Efrain Gonzalez Jr., who is I want to call him a Bronx political pundit, but he's also in the district and knowledgeable about one particular city councilman, Ruben Diaz Sr., who's made some rather, shall we call them, controversial remarks about gays. Efrain, if you want to weigh in on that.
Everyone, yes, there were controversial remarks. And it wasn't just a remark, it was a condescending remark as well as something that really had no place in the conversation from a New York City sitting council member.
And it was unnecessary. I mean, always those kind of comments are unnecessary, but this just came out of his mouth.
Yes, and the show he did, it was a Spanish language show called El Desahogo, which is translated The Relief. You know, that is not what he did by coming out on that show. He created a lot of problems and a lot of Alka-Seltzer, I hate to say, for Speaker Corey Johnson, because the Speaker, when he heard that the statement was made and it was translated to him, it was meant and it was put out by him, where he said that New York City government is controlled by the homosexual community. Now, I want to tell everybody that if somebody who was let's say a white Republican who had said, well, you know, the New York City Council is controlled by the black community, you know, people would go crazy.
Or in the case of the Republicans, the Jews.
Yeah. So what happened there was that we got to understand also that this isn't the first time that he has made controversial comments. It's not even the first decade that he's right.
done it. His entire career, because legislatively, he was not a firebrand in any way, shape, or form. He's just someone who likes to stir the pot.
But in
his case, the pot is empty.
But he's also in a position. I mean, I think one of the reasons why we're even having this discussion is because he is in a position to make policy, a political policy, which impacts women.
But what I found most interesting,
right.
and Efrain, you might find this interesting as well, is that the people in the Bronx got sick of him as a senator, and they got rid of him. And yet he comes back as a city council member. Well, what does that say about Bronx politics?
Well, let me explain how that happened. And he decided to run for the city council seat that Annabelle Palmer had been turned out. And so what happened was, no, he never got kicked out. Now, he just ran for that seat, and then it created a special election where we have one of the Louis Sepulveda took over as the state senator. Now, one of the things about that remark, though, is that the reason why there was action taken by the speaker, because it was uncalled for, but also he was chairman of the for-hire vehicles dealing with the issues of Uber, the yellow taxis, the green taxis, the livery cabs, and anything else that's for hire. And what happened was, if you have someone like that who makes a comment like that, what happens if, let's say, two
a gay woman is involved,
women had a complaint because a taxi driver, and it actually happens, where a taxi driver refused to give them service and drive them because they were kissing in the back of his vehicle, you know, the back of the vehicle that he uses. Now, what if he gets presented with that? Does he allow it to go to committee? Does he try to help them in their course? That's where the speaker had to abolish it, because, I mean, we could have had an incredible amount of lawsuits, and it was because of the way that he opened it up, where he was antagonistic towards the homosexual community. Because he didn't just say that to inform the public. He said it in a condescending way, as if he hates the homosexual community. And when you're a city council person, remember, you vote for your district issues. You get allocations and funding for your district. But a lot of times, as Ardina alluded to, you're voting on policy for the entire city of New York. And that's what makes this dangerous. Many families with maybe 5 or 6 straight, heterosexual people could have one member that is LGBT. And you could have 2. We don't know. But the fact is that they're part of the city, and they have a right to access city government. You don't have to agree with their lifestyle, but he just goes way out, and he just hates them.
But let me interrupt for a second. But I think it even extends to his affiliation with the Assemblies of God, but right now the politics basically are contained to the confines of New York City. But the Assemblies of God has chapters all over Westchester County and New York City, and I wouldn't say that they're exactly advocates of women's rights. They're not. I'm going to be honest with you, Ardina. They're not, because they're women that have complained. The problem is that when issues arose and they come, there's this thing of separation of church and state, and we're seeing the ramblings of what's going on with the Catholic Church with child sex victims and the Child Sex Victims Act. There are abuse problems that happen in the churches, even in the Pentecostal churches, and it is dangerous to have somebody that they put on a pulpit, and then if you say anything, they're going to say that you're discriminating against the church. You have a right to your faith. Everybody does. And you have a right to assemble, to pray, to worship. But here's the problem. If any criminal act or anything happens towards anyone, and one of them primarily I would say is domestic violence, if that happens, if it happens also with sexual abuse with any member of the church, then it has to be brought to the attention. There shouldn't be a fortress where that we have to look the other way. So how can the Billion Rising March, how can the march is going to happen on March 2nd in the Westchester, how can that movement impact what we are talking about?
Well, I think
let Gina weigh in.
Well, I was going to say that's one of the first things is to blow the lid off the silence. It's called 1 Billion Rising to bring attention to the vastness of the problem. It is 1 in 3 women who will be beaten or raped in her lifetime. And once you are faced with that statistic, once you know the degree of the problem, you can't look away anymore. And hopefully, we get more and more people who know about it, who get involved in it. And I've seen a lot more people get involved in politics these past couple of years because of things like this.
That's right.
Judy, you want to weigh in?
There's certainly been a renewed activism and the connection between art and politics, and that both are trying to transform and shift people's perspective. There's such a tremendous need to really do this on this issue. Also, with psychoeducation, we are going into schools with a lot of this and working with students there. You speak about the LGBT community. As a psychotherapist, I'm very well aware of the number of young people in our community who have experienced tremendous angst and distress, and some even getting to the point of considering taking their lives because of getting terribly abused about who they are, not how they're living, who they are. And this is also under that umbrella of what we're fighting with 1 Billion Rising.
Well, we are going to continue this discussion on the other side of the break. You are listening to Westchester Eye on the radio, and we're talking today about the upcoming march called the Billion Rising March, which is going to happen on March 2nd. Our guests are Gina Lamparella and Judy Kass, 2 organizers of that march. And also we have Efrain Gonzalez Jr., who's on the line, who's going to continue the discussion about how we bring to the forefront politicians who do not support women who make homophobic remarks. See you in a few.
Take to the airwaves with us every day at Westchester's only remaining local community station, 1460 on your AM dial, or streaming live right now at WVOX.com. Better yet, download the WVOX app and take us with you wherever you go.
1460 WVOX.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome back, everyone, to our final quarter hour of this week's edition of Westchester Eye on the Radio. I'm John Sharan, along with Peter Moses, Ardina Seward, and our special in-studio guests, Judy Kass and Gina Lamparella, and our phone-in guest, Efrain Gonzalez. We're talking today about 1 Billion Rising, an awareness group that is out there to remind people that 1 in 3 women in their lifetime will be assaulted. And they're having an event on March 2nd at 3 p.m. at Patriots Park in Tarrytown, where they're going to have a march to make sure that everyone has this fresh in their minds. And ladies, I'll ask you again. You raised over $40,000 with the Vagina Monologues to help women and to help shelters for these people. There's an organization in particular that you raised this money for. Could you give the email address again as to where people can find out more information?
There were actually 2 organizations, Hope Store and My Sister's Place, but the website of Hope Store is HopeStoreNY.org. So I'll repeat that, sorry. www.hopestoreny.org. So.
I'm sorry. Prior to during the break, you had talked about progressive legislation. Gina, you want to address that?
Sure. Yeah, we were talking about just sort of a renewed energy among people in the political process. And, one of those things was the IDC, the Independent Democratic Caucus in the New York State Senate, that I knew nothing about until this last election. But people are really much more focused on taking initiative in their own governance. And so there were a lot of new progressive candidates. The IDC was voted out, and now New Yorkers are represented by the people that they voted in, and they're voting in things like the Reproductive Health Act, which says women have a right to an abortion in the state of New York. The Child Victims Act, which was just very recently passed, which gives child sex abuse victims more time to sue and pursue criminal charges against their abusers. And
it's kind of amazing that the Republicans who ran the state Senate for so many years held back all this progressive legislation. And now it's being passed because it's a one-party state. Now, I don't know. I'm happy about this, but I am unhappy that when we have one-party rule in the state of New York, things don't always go well that way either. You end up with some people being empowered who shouldn't be, and there's no balance right now in state government. So while I applaud these kinds of bills, and I'm not judging any other kinds of bills, it is a problem. And I know John would agree with this as well, because,
one-party rule is a bad thing, Peter. I mean, the bottom line is it means that you don't have to listen to the other point of view, and that's never good.
And then you have states like Texas and other southern states who it's all Republicans running. And
one-party rule is a bad thing.
And they're taking abortion rights away almost by the hour in some of these other states. So while New York has become, once again, a bastion of liberalism, the country's not. The country has turned rightward.
Frighteningly so.
And geographically, maybe, but I think that population-wise, I'm not so convinced of that.
That's right.
Well, the problem is it depends on who's voting. So if you want
It's
your
always
voice heard,
dependent on that, yeah.
you have to vote. And even though there may be more progressive people out there, they're not necessarily getting to the polls, and that change is not being made.
In all of the efforts that you two do, and the ancillary things that other people do on your behalf or with you, how much of that is about getting out the vote, about not just talking the talk, but walking the walk? Meaning, if you want change, it's up to you.
True. And we really need to target young people. It's very important in the apathy among younger voters.
They don't seem to understand that democracy or Republican democracy is not a spectator sport.
Right.
I'm lucky. I mean, you have a daughter, and I have a daughter, and I'm assuming, and you have a daughter,
And I have a daughter.
I don't have a daughter.
4 of us have daughters.
I've got 2.
My daughter is strident about making sure she votes.
Well, I used to take my daughter with me
So did
to
I.
vote. And she'd pull the lever and say, "Where's the candy, Mommy?" So I mean, it was something that was taught, the civic duty of voting.
My daughter liked to go because I would always say the same thing when I'd get there, and she thought it was funny and goofy. Every time I go to vote in White Plains, to go, "Hello, my name is Peter Moses. I've come to exercise my constitutional right to vote." And everybody laughs. And now when my daughter, when she got older, she was, "Dad, I don't know if I want to go with you anymore."
But something.
But why not?
I thought she would laugh when you got disgusted at some of the candidates and chose as a write-in for Willie Mays.
She wasn't born then, but in 1976, I didn't like Ford, and I really didn't like Jimmy Carter either. So I did a write-in vote in Ohio for Willie Mays. I was the first person I know who voted for an African American non-candidate, but for president.
But something. I think it's even beyond voting. It is important when women are abused or discriminated against in the workplace, and they're afraid to speak up. A lot of women are afraid to go to HR because they think, "Oh my God, my shift is going to change. I'll get fired from
And
my
look
job."
at the industry we came from.
Well,
it's
let me tell you,
rampant in the news.
I will make a personal confession that it did happen to me on my job, and there was an abusive person there who still remains there
Verbally.
Verbally to the point of just being derogatory, cursing me.
But you got him
in the newsroom.
back. You got him back.
But the thing is, sadly, I waited for a number of years because I was afraid that it would impact my salary. I was afraid that it would impact my shift. And one day it came to a head where it was just blatant. And I went home and I thought about it. I said, I've got to do something, not only for myself, but for the other women in this newsroom who remain silent. And I sat down and I wrote a note to HR, and he was disciplined. That individual is still there. I wouldn't say that he was totally contrite, but my suggestion to women out there is that when you are subjected to that kind of abuse, don't wait for the stress. Don't wait for the impact of what could happen to you, and go to HR. There are a number of laws in place that will protect you.
And yet you belong to a newsroom that was probably the most diverse in the city. And when you were there at one point, I think there were at least 2, you and Barbara Lepore, but wasn't there a third woman camera person?
There was a third woman, but what happened in that newsroom is that individual's behavior was condoned because he was an efficient worker, and as long as they're making money, as long as the ratings are good, they didn't care. And at one point, it was mentioned to a supervisor, and the supervisor just said, "Well, he has problems," and walked away. He has multiple problems and did a lot of damage to women. But, enough of my story. The point that I want to make is that you have to speak up, not only for yourself, you have to speak up for your daughters, you have to speak up for other women
and
who may be suffering the same abuse.
And you have to make sure that you take accurate notes to document these sorts of things, because the fact of the matter is these can be very emotional situations.
And
you can miss out on certain facts that may be relevant as time goes by.
Absolutely. You're so correct, because that helped strengthen my argument. Because a lot of times it's he says, she says. But if you keep a log, if you keep a date, if you keep a time, then that puts strength in your argument. So when they come along and they say, "Well, something, we don't think we need your services anymore." "Oh, yes, you do, because I have a logbook full of incidents.
That's right. I spent 21 years in a global HR position in the corporate side. I got tired of dressing naked emperors, so I left. But I saw a lot of this, and in fact, one of the first situations that I was involved with as an HR person, hearing someone's complaint, I was told pretty much, the guy's a rainmaker. Back off. In so many words, and it happens. It happens very often. But women. It can be very difficult if you're in a situation where you cannot afford, you're petrified, you cannot afford to potentially lose the job or an opportunity. You might be a single parent. You might be the only one earning money.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Efrain, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Now, you have a clearer picture than we might of what goes on in the Latino community, and I'm curious what your take is on what we're talking about here.
Well, it does. It happens in every community. It's just that in the Latino community, when we're looking for action to be taken, as we saw with the women who brought up the issue with R. Kelly that got exposed, is that people of color get looked down upon by the media, the way they cover the story. They don't cover the story a lot.
Yes.
So we got to look at that, because whoever's in that room controlling the spin, and the ones who are the editors and the ones who run the papers, you're not going to get those stories. You might get a rape case here or there. They want to sensationalize it. But, there's a lot of openness that needs to happen to have it equalized where everybody can get justice.
We're getting the music. And with that, Efrain, my dear, we're going to have to end the show. But thank you so much for joining into the conversation.
Before we end the show, Ardina, what are we doing next week?
Next week we're going to try and do a show on an individual who's been in the news lately who has moved his wife has Alzheimer's, and he's moved his mistress into the house to help care for.
That seems kind of convenient.
I read about that.
So anyway, we're going to talk about that.
Yes. Anyway, thanks for listening, everybody. I want to thank our three guests, actually. And you all have a great weekend. Stay off the street for the next 24 hours because the wind is going to continue, and I don't want anybody to get hurt. And move your cars as far away from trees as possible. Have a great week, everybody. We'll be back next Monday at